when you're just there we go. When you're watching that scene, it's just like in The Shining. Since I just hit record, it's weirdly hysterical, right? Kubrick was a funny guy, I guess.
There's some really amazing stories about Kubrick. One of my favorite ones is that he hated the corporate nature of the studios so much, and he would just mess with the corporate heads, like the tops of the companies in the studios, and he would basically he legitimately did freak out about stuff once in a while, but then he would also know that they were accustomed to him freaking out, so he would call him up and say I need everyone to be here in London by tomorrow morning. Like, everyone get here. We need to have a huge meeting. And they would all fly over there, and then he would just completely ignore them, like not even show up, just blow off the phone calls. And it was entirely just like a mind game that he was playing.
I thought you were gonna say like showed up in like a Groucho Marx nose and glasses or something. That'd be
No, I
fun
mean,
too.
even better. He just completely ignored him. He had everyone freak out and show up and book the hotel rooms and show up to the meeting, and then he just didn't go.
And for Concords, yeah.
And what
Oh,
else? He would measure. For some reason, he was such a micromanager where he would look at the newspaper articles that were advertising his ads for Clockwork Orange and 2001 Space Odyssey and everything, and he would find out how much did we pay this paper, and he would measure it to make sure that it actually fit within whatever the studio had agreed to pay. And he found many, many instances where it was hey, this was off by 3/4 of an inch, and we paid you X amount, so we're gonna need some kind of refund. And it was just so funny that he had such an overwhelming amount of control over every aspect of the film that what makes Mike Kubrick conspiracy theories the most interesting to me, at least, is that he didn't leave a lot of details up to chance. So any details that you do see, it makes me feel like he put them in intentionally, or he knew that was there, or something. It wasn't just coincidental.
who knows? Maybe he was just building conspiracy theories to screw with everybody.
I mean, I love that idea too. So
Yeah, fantastic. The other one that I was just for some reason you had me thinking of Bach, the composer. Like we don't have many of his writings, like letters or anything, and the ones that we do have are mostly him like haggling or complaining that he's not getting his beer allotment or something. So just
he was one of those artists that would have had all the blue M&Ms removed, right?
well, no, it seems like he was just like basically like a I don't think he was Bavarian, but just a church dude who liked his beer. You get your patron. That's how it works in the 18th century, I guess. So, okay, I guess we'll get into this. I just put a disclaimer. I put out the next week's episode, put in a disclaimer. If somebody's waiting for this one, they can go direct their complaints to the hurricane. So,
Yeah, that's correct.
is everything cleaned up on your end?
For the most part, yeah. I got a fence that got knocked over, and but luckily, I guess our house is just high enough that we didn't get any kind of flooding. But a lot of places here in Orlando saw their cars and their first floor underwater for the first time. So
Wow.
there's a lot of devastation around, but we lucked out.
Yeah, we had a typhoon about 3 years, almost exactly 3 years ago. Yeah, but that had me having to walk 2 train stations every day because the train stopped running to my house for like a month. Uh, there's a bridge that I use often that only just reopened about 6 months ago. So yeah, we did get a bit of a whomping by that typhoon, which in the mountains, it's pretty weird. So usually we just get a lot of rain.
Yeah, but you can, just like Florida, you can tell by the shape of just the entire geographic area you're in that that's been shaped by something, and that something is going to continue just happening over and over and over on a very long course. So it's like either embrace it or move, right?
Yeah, really. Okay, I guess I'll go ahead and intro us into Peter Pan and Hook, and yeah, like your Alice in Wonderland trip, I probably have more of the live action notes than the animated ones, but let's do it. Hello, this is the Caught Disney podcast where we look for all those secret meanings and interesting details that you didn't notice in classic Disney films. This is Matt here. As always, joining me is Thomas Gorence, the paranoid American. Good morning, good evening,
Mm,
whatever.
Yeah, good morning. That's me.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm an 8:30 morning man like all the time. So that's podcast an hour. uh
And it's about 7:30 p.m. here. So we're always got like a nice almost exact, 180-degree spin on this.
yeah, I was doing I actually did an 11 p.m. one last night because I had a UK guest, and that's just like hey how the time ended up working. So this morning I was like looking at my wife like trying to see is she gonna like start being like, oh my god, you were so loud last night. But she didn't seem to mind too much, I guess. So that's good. Yeah, podcast burning the stick on both ends and podcasting at all hours. It's fun.
You gotta put in the work, man.
Yeah, yeah. We are up to Peter Pan today. I'd say, man, as we go through these, I'm like, oh yeah, Peter Pan. I guess that's my favorite one. I was like, no, 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 that's a coin flip with Alice in Wonderland. Oh, I forgot about Dumbo. I think I'm still giving the crown to Dumbo, but we're definitely on like ones I really dig at the moment.
Yeah, and honestly, this is one of those that I mean, I'm sure that I watched it as a kid, right? Every kid has seen Peter Pan a handful of times. At least, in the States for sure. But this one never really made a huge impact. I always remember Hook way more than I remember the cartoon, but upon rewatching this cartoon, the 1953 animation, I was actually kind of astounded with how much the animation techniques had progressed from all the previous films so far. Like the detail, the frames, the rotoscoping, the dynamic kind of like flowing of clothes and cloaks and like curtains and things like this. All of those extra little details were things that I don't think really existed in almost any of the previous films, at least to the same kind of like frame rate and the length and just the amount of things happening on the screen. So all that really stood out to me in a big way that I don't ever really remember like paying attention to, I guess.
Yeah, I'm having another look at the date. I'm thinking by this point was the Disneyland television show underway. 53. So I guess that mechanism was starting to get in place where they maybe had a little bit more of a I don't want to say assembly line, although to a certain extent probably was an assembly line where you would simply just have people doing the movement of the curtains or something where, in the past maybe I don't know, it was a little more piecemeal. I mean, it certainly seems like 30s Disney was a little more ramshackle.
Yeah, I mean they were figuring things out by this point because I also noticed in a lot of the previous classics we've watched, some of the animation techniques and level of detail is a little bit inconsistent between the scenes. Alice in Wonderland actually was a really good example of that one, where all of a sudden it had like this extra amount of detail and frames almost of like the rotoscoping at the very end where they're walking away into the distance that didn't exist in some of those earlier ones, as cool as the animation was. Whereas Peter Pan, I don't really think any of the scenes necessarily stood out as not being consistent with other scenes. So I think that was just like a huge leap towards that, like almost that standard and consistency that you kind of expect from Disney at this point.
Yeah, as far as the movies, the anime of Peter Pan I have seen a lot, but again, that was my daughter as a toddler 10 years ago phase. Like you, I'm sure I saw it once or twice as a kid, but it didn't really, stick in the mind where but then 10 years ago we had views of this and some of the straight to DVD Tinkerbell movies as well. So I've seen like three of those, which I mean those aren't important at all, but it's just like, that's
Yeah, I'm
that's
so
where
sorry.
that's
I'm
where I'm
so
coming
sorry
from
you've had to go through all of those.
well, we knew what we were getting into, right? And yeah, 3-year-olds like that
Th-
stuff.
this one also surprisingly, I guess if you exclude a lot of the art house adaptations of Alice in Wonderland and like the weird, student films, but if you look at like how many remakes and sequels and prequels and things, I think Peter Pan might actually be up there in terms of all the different properties that Disney's made movies of. This one seems to have a very large amount of ancillary movies and series and remakes and reboots. Probably more than Pinocchio even.
Yeah, I'm thinking my actual childhood memory of this is probably at least once, definitely once, and maybe even more than once being taken on a school field trip to downtown Atlanta to see a performance of the play. So, that stuck in the mind. Hook, I think we saw that. I'm sure we saw that in the theater, possibly twice, probably rented it once, but I don't think I'd seen it since '92 until or '91 or whatever it was until watching it, last a few nights ago.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that one. And before we get too far into these movies, there was one kind of cool thread that I wanted to pull on here. And that was that this um this Disney movie with the Peter Pan has kind of its origins in folklore, but not the same way that a lot of the previous ones. But there's one cool aspect of it is that the original story of Peter Pan, as it was being adapted from kind of a series of short stories that were in a book called The Little White Bird, by J.M. Barrie. And as he started writing it into a screenplay, or like as not a screenplay, but as a like a play, he kind of like started adapting to it, saw what the audience really liked, kind of like kept adapting and changing, very similar to how Alice in Wonderland. Remember, like originally they didn't really have some of the favorite characters. They didn't really have the Mad Hatter scene in one of the original incarnations of it. And as it kind of progressed, he started adding more to it, refining it, adding more details. And this is one of those examples that the very first time that Peter Pan was actually broadcast on a stage, it didn't actually have Captain Hook, and Peter Pan was the ultimate bad guy. And then slowly he began adding in the concept of pirates, because kind of like the popular kids, what are the kids into today? Well, all the kids really liked pirates at the time, so he decided to kind of like add this character that was a pirate of Captain Hook, and then add the crocodile and the ticking, and like now that's kind of canon, and it's one of like the most famous characters of it. But at the time it was like the slow progression as he was working through it. So I thought that was kind of cool, because that's not always the case. Sometimes the stories are, like sometimes they're just this big amalgamation of like very old folklore, so it's more of like a pick and choose. But these ones were very much active stories that were being developed as they were also becoming popular.
I actually found a modern equivalent of that just last week. I'd gotten in one of those wiki rabbit holes and just started reading about like the He-Man franchise, and it was kind of an
Oh,
interesting. It was like a similar trajectory where they did the toys and the comics, and um, like they're like Prince Adam was like kind of like a nasty guy because he's kind of foppish, and the show the I have the power thing was like 2 years into the franchise. So it's kind of like another one where interesting how there's these earlier forms of it that are missing key elements. Not that those earlier forms are necessarily bad, they're just like weirdly different.
yeah,
um
and
I
it's actually really interesting to be able to see the earlier versions and how they kind of adapt over time, because I guess very often you watch this movie, like you watch the polished 1953 movie and you're like, oh wow, what a set story and this whole environment and the characters, but not realizing that that's a culmination of like lots of rough drafts and rewrites and kind of like revisits that a lot of people, I guess, you wouldn't even realize unless you go back and you try to read some of those old versions.
I guess for me, the ultimate version of this, though, probably is the Disneyland ride, Peter Pan's Flight. Now, let me throw out, I get the benefit of when I've ridden it most recent, the past few times with the Tokyo version, which is the full version. And at most, you're going to see one element of the ride not working. If you come back the next day, at least that one's been fixed. I mean, it's just they keep it pristine, it's smooth. I know if you ride in Florida, it's kind of a janky movement with broken down things, and but the Tokyo one is just like fantastic.
Well, and I don't know what the wait times are like at the Tokyo one, but when you go to Disney World in Orlando, and I assume Disneyland in LA, that it's going to be like an hour and a half to a 2 hour wait for whatever ride you're going on. So unless you actually have kids, you're not going on the Dumbo ride, you're not going on the Peter Pan ride. You're spending those 2 hours waiting on like the two or three things that you might actually really want to go on.
Yeah, I mean Tokyo can be notoriously busy, but when I was in my 20s, didn't have a kid yet, what I would do is like target like a Thursday in February. And I remember once or twice being like, gee, I wish there were more people here. It feels weirdly empty. So
Well, those were
So
the great because
anyone that
when I worked at the park, those were the greatest days. Would you would just know when the park was empty because you could see it from the office essentially, and just run out there during lunch and just knock out 3 or 4 rides that typically might take an hour to get through for
Mhm.
whatever reason. Like the park's empty that day, and those
Yes.
that's great, man. Those are the best days ever.
So pro tip for anyone that wants to visit Tokyo Disney, bring a coat, come on a Thursday in February. And yeah, Disney Sea, I remember taking a girlfriend there once and we rode Indiana Jones and she was like, wait a minute, was the skull blue or red? I don't know. Let's ride it again. Just walk back around and check. So yeah, yeah. And so I do feel like I had those to myself. But anyway, that's where the ride really just keyed in. It's the up, the track is above you and you're just kind of like drifting along. It's nice. It's pleasant. As far as the movie and the story goes, watching this most recent time, I was definitely thinking of it like it being a parable or a metaphor for sort of law of attraction, intention sort of stuff seems like very baked into this. And actually, I don't know that much about Barry's background, so maybe you got a word or two on that.
Well, yeah, man. So I did a deep dive because I wasn't as familiar either, and I came up with some really wild information that kind of turned where I guess my initial assumptions were for a lot of like the symbolism of say like Peter Pan's shadow and being detached from it and the Lost Boys and never wanting to grow up and all of these things. Some of it's a little bit obvious of like the archetypes that he's putting together, but his actual backstory was tragic, fascinating, perhaps very offensive in like a Lewis Carroll sort of way. Um, so the general premise here is that he right before his brother's 14th birthday, they were out ice skating on some pond somewhere, and there was some kind of an accident, and the initial reports for like the first like 30 or 40 years after this happened was that they were with a friend and the friend knocked his brother over and it resulted in a cranial fracture and his brother just died like a couple days before his 14th birthday. Later, sort of like articles and research has come out and they say that the friend might actually have been J.M. Barrie, James, and they call him Jamie at the time when he was a kid. So that when the reports came out, it said a friend knocked him over because it was too tragic to actually report that this kid knocked over his brother on the ice and killed him. And whatever happened, that obviously was very traumatic incident, but it affected the mom even more. And it got to a weird point where the brother's name was David. So Jamie, after having killed David, assumingly that's one of the theories, the mother just couldn't accept the fact, and she was kind of split of two minds. And one was that, well, Jamie just or David just is never going to grow up. He's just always going to be a 13-year-old forever. But also Jamie would start to act and respond as David, and the mom kind of played into it. So he kind of was like role playing as his dead brother, which I'm sure sort of created all sorts of unhealthy connections. And at the same time, he felt this sort of detachment from his mom because the mom kind of blamed him for the death. And that was regardless if he did it or it was the friend that did it, just that loss of life of like the favorite baby child, the youngest child in the family, just losing that put everything on Jamie. So that's sort of some of the backstory of where this comes from, and that's why the Lost Boys kind of stay young forever, and Peter Pan's all about staying young forever. It's this homage to his dead brother, and you'll find some kind of like crazy theories on what the Lost Boys and Hook and the whole Peter Pan. One of them that feeds into this is essentially that all the Lost Boys are dead because they represent children that are never going to grow up. So, and Peter Pan, specifically his shadow form, is the one that brings them like from the life into the afterlife so that they don't feel alone during that travel. But it puts this very dark, somber tone over the entire story of Peter Pan now, that Peter Pan's really kind of like this mercurial messenger or like helper of the dead children's souls, and that all the Lost Boys don't grow up because they're dead and they're
That makes
ghosts.
him the boatman of the river Styx, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So that's part of the backstory, and the other aspect, which gets into this creepy Lewis Carroll sort of realm, is that he also kind of became stunted. And one of the notes said that it was very atypical, but right around the time that this happened, when he, theoretically killed his brother died at least, he just stopped growing both physically and emotionally. So he essentially stayed as like a 15-year-old for the rest of his life. And when he got into his mid 30s, just like Lewis Carroll, he almost exclusively made friends with like 6, 7, and 8-year-old children, and would, go around and like find ways to become friends and like develop long lasting relationships with children, even to the point where he got in close with this family that he actually named the children after. John, Michael, and Peter were named after these actual family that he kind of like, inserted himself into. The dad died, I think, of cancer, and then like the mom later died, and he took it upon himself to forge and rewrite the will so that the children would be left under his care instead of under the nanny's care. So he actually ended up becoming the legal guardian for these children. And if you look into the backstories of these children, I think 2 of them committed suicide. The one that was actually named Peter Pan was named after, threw himself under a train, and always considered this to be like the most tragic or was the most horrible masterpiece ever created or something. Like, he never liked being associated with the movie. And there was a letter that was found written to another one of these kids that he was friends with in his like late 30s, and it essentially amounted to like, don't tell anyone else, don't tell anyone about our relationship, I adore you, yada yada. The connotations are kind of, left there. There hasn't been as much digging into his background as there has been into Lewis Carroll. However, it kind of just like leads down a lot of the same questions and same paths. So there's some of the backstory for J.M. Barrie and the original influence of Peter Pan, sort of this arbinger or carrier of death, and almost like an angel that looked over dead children. And that's one of the more like outlandish, somber takes on this, but it really fits in. Like, the puzzle piece has all the right little notches that fit perfectly into the big puzzle.
Oh yeah, it has all the, in the at least in this animated film version, and in most people's minds now, you got Captain Hook and basically Devil Red, that sort of thing. Like there's a heaven and hell to Never Never Land, so a purgatory
So
as well, I suppose.
and if we just start going through the movie, because the movie is actually the 1953, animated, it is a great model to kind of like step through the different phases of the story. Some things were left out, some things were kind of added, but for the most part, it sets like a really perfect pace. And the first scene really is Peter Pan being attracted to Wendy's house because Wendy's got his shadow like kept away in a drawer or something, right?
You don't want to lose your shadow self. I guess. Yeah. Again, the take I was getting watching this was I was like, I wonder if it's kind of like an astral projection thing, which I guess that's a few ticks over, maybe not quite as tragic, but Peter's
Well,
teaching
in
him
the
how to
original
astral project or
story,
something.
the way that he loses his shadow to begin with is that he's at his house with his mom, Peter Pan is, and she shuts the window so quick that it basically severs him and his shadow, and that's how he originally loses the shadow. And the metaphor here, kind of the underlying text here, is that he's kind of had this severance with him and his mom, and she's kind of shut him out. The window closed and he's on the outside looking in, and he's kind of like feeling like he's detached from some part of his soul, which is probably his dead brother, his relationship with his mom or whatever. So when Wendy gets it, she's got this detached shadow, and the first thing that she realizes is that he can't reattach himself to his own shadow. She has to help him sew it to his feet so that it'll actually stick with him. And another thing that was telling is that as this is happening, he's mentioning how like she's the mother figure, and, oh, like, will you be my mother? So his original mom is the one that severed him from his shadow, blocked him out with the window, and now as he's being united with his shadow again, it's through Wendy, and again through this window. So that was this very like one for one, comparison of here's how his original mother severed him from his shadow, and here's how his new mother is reuniting him with his shadow. And it's mommy issues all the way down, right?
Oh yeah. And the other one that kind of this might be a movie only thing, but yeah, I just never really picked up on it in the past where they're like, okay, kids, here's your tonic, then go to bed. I'm like, wait a minute, this is like 1900. The tonic is probably heroin. So, maybe these
It's
kids are just
definitely
tripping
opium
off
of
to
some kind.
Neverland.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Neverland and Peter Pan could be like their shared fever dream or something. But of course, the metaphors are way more interesting. But just that was my first thought. Like, well, of course they go in Neverland. um, I'm just having a look through my notes a little bit. I guess we can talk about the Darlings' parents a little bit. And this movie is just a weird caricature of two people that never seem like they'd fit together. But maybe
Yeah,
it's like a
the mom and the dad
Victorian
definitely.
hangover. Yeah, kind of a Victorian era hangover or something. So yeah.
Yeah,
um
the customs, the clothing, sort of the mannerisms and everything do have this sort of vague but Victorian era feel to them for sure.
so we've already kind of painted Peter Pan as the boatman of the river Styx or whatever. He also is like a pan, I guess. He doesn't have the centaur or the goat body or anything to go with it, but
But he's
that's got
got
to
the
be like
flute. He's got the flute.
he's got the flute for sure.
And the original story that Peter Pan was based on, again, it focused on him as a child when he was just like weeks old, but he rode around on a goat. And the name Peter Pan was just not haphazardly chosen. That Pan literally is a reference to the god Pan, the trickster, the the guy with the little flute. So this has always been the influence of Peter Pan, and it was a little bit more obvious with this little baby riding a goat around, playing a flute. I mean, you've got the all the symbolism right there, but as it kind of evolved over time, some of that stuff dropped off. There's no goat obviously in the final story and the cartoon.
Well, and then when we get to Hook, which we'll talk about more, they make Pan seem like it's like a title like Caesar or something.
And also this doesn't really come across in the movie because they don't really show it this way, but in almost every time the play was enacted, but before the movie came out, Hook was always played by Peter's dad. So there was always this connotation that the angry nasty dad with the bad attitude, that was all against folklore and fairy tales and wanted everyone to be serious, that was also Hook. And again, there's like this Oedipus complex going on of Peter Pan never grows up, always going to be, mommy's boy. And then I'm going to be like fighting my dad to the death constantly, over essentially the death of my brother.
Yeah, the Oedipal complex drawn out for eternity, I guess. So yeah, I guess there's a fair amount of like a Greek hangover coming into this movie. Um, in Neverland, again, let's break down. You said you want to break down the sections of that a bit.
Yes. So when we're first introduced to Neverland, right, it's essentially this place that you can only get to by flying and having happy thoughts, and the key ingredient being pixie dust. And on a slight tangent, in the movie, they make it seem like Peter Pan forgets. First, he's like, "Hey, you just got to think of happy thoughts," and it's not working. Then he's like, "Oh yeah, that's right. You need pixie dust too." In the book, again, he was like this more, mischievous sort of trickster character, and again, he was almost like a villain before they introduced Hook. So he was trying to get these kids to think that they could fly without telling them that pixie dust existed. And then finally he's like, all right, I've been messing with you guys. Really, you need this pixie dust. And then they fly off to Neverland. But as we actually see Neverland in the 1953 cartoon, it zooms in and we see there's like Mermaid Lagoon is an area on there. And there's also, I think, Cannibal Cove, which they don't mention again by name at all, but it's directly next to where all the Indians hang out. And there's some stuff that we'll get into when we get into like what I would say like the racist part of the movie, that where they've got these Native Americans sort of tied directly to this Cannibal Cove area. That was just, it's an interesting aspect as they're flying into Neverland. These are the different kind of areas that are within Neverland.
And I guess that's almost like a little precursor to the whole Disneyland concept. You can even tie it out, whereas Cannibal Cove becomes, Toontown. Nobody talks about Toontown. But
And I was wondering too that how much the Pirates of Peter Pan influenced the pirate ride of Disney and all the other pirates in Disney. Was there another film or influence before this that I'm not aware of, or do you think this is where the pirates, um, like the entire ride and the whole sphere of pirates in the Disney universe came from?
I think there is definitely something to that. I'm actually running a quick search. I know that the pirate accent comes from a live action film, which actually still might be a Disney film. I'm just typing pirate accent origin and see if I can bring that up.
Because I got that feeling as we were watching this. It was like, man, this reminds me so much of the Pirates ride, Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disney, just with the way that they were singing and the way that they were all like grouped together and sort of like had that cadence of like swinging their arms together that you would almost see on like a Disney ride. And it just reminded me of it the entire time.
Okay, I've got it here. In 1950, the British actor Robert Newton starred as Long John Silver in a film adaptation of the Robert Louis Stevenson novel Treasure Island, and apparently he was the first guy to rock that accent. So this would have been, just after that. So I think we can give this movie definitely visual credit, I think, to a certain extent of how we kind of. So yeah, as far as the ride's concerned, for sure, because pirates themselves of course would have a wide variety of many different accents, so because they're from everywhere.
And speaking of pirates and Hook, there was another really cool thing that I had never realized until doing a deep dive on this, and that's that the original story was based on Hook and the ticking crocodile chasing after him was a direct correlation of Moby Dick and Captain Ahab, down to the point where the a writer, he kind of gave direct credit to Melville, the writer of Moby Dick. And in addition to not just Moby Dick and Hook, there was a lot of other aspects, like all of the food that came from the Lost Boys, like the exact cuisine that they eat came from another book that Melville wrote. And there was like a few other instances where he just kind of like directly lifted things that Melville had written in his books and put them into Peter Pan, more as an homage, not necessarily plagiarism, because later on he wrote articles kind of saying like, here's where I took this information from and why I did it, and it was because he was just like in love with Melville's work.
I guess we all kind of experience it backwards now, because I definitely, knew about Captain Hook and his ticking crocodile first, and then later learned about the white whale, and maybe in subconsciously got like, oh yeah, that's kind of like a Peter Pan. I think most of us do it in reverse these days. You don't have too many kids obsessed with Moby Dick. There's
No,
got
I
to be
mean, and
one.
honestly, I think it's a perfect example of how a strong archetype can kind of jump between stories, and it's essentially the same thing, right? Like even if you change the dynamic between the whale and the crocodile and Hook and Ahab, it's kind of the same story because it was intentionally made to be the same story.
Well, I guess it's the idea that the sea is so unknowable. Again, we are supposed to know more about nearby space than our oceans, right? So
Yeah.
Lovecraftian horrors at the depths of the ocean. That kind of comes through, I guess, with that kind of concept, that whale's just waiting for you out there, and it'll show up when it does. The crocodile show up when it
Well, and
does.
not just that, but both of those creatures already have a taste for you because they've bitten off and eaten an appendage of your body, so now they know that taste. So the crocodile like wants more because he had Hook's hand, and now he wants the rest of them, right? And it wasn't necessarily the exact same thing with Ahab, but Ahab also became disfigured in his pursuit here. So they both made these kind of trades in their pursuit of these monsters.
Is it is it Hook that really drives the Peter actually chopped his hand off vibe? The movie doesn't really uh Peter Pan doesn't really
Yeah,
push
so
that.
so he would still have his hand if it were not for Peter, and he would technically also still be alive if it weren't for Peter. So Peter again in this way is sort of a villain, especially if you start like we can start going into some of the other kind of like metaphors in this movie. But it does potentially cast Hook as this unsung hero of the movie and this unintentional, villain, and that Peter Pan was really the bad guy all along.
Yeah, I mean, like he, I mean, even from the start, he is even in the Disney animation, he's a little prickly, you know? Like this isn't like a kid that you might he's gonna screw with you if you hang out with him. He's that kid, you know?
Well, and it's really telling because in the very, very start of the movie, right before he enters Wendy's window, he's kind of creeping on their roof, and Tinkerbell's kind of floating by. And as she flies by his face, there's this one sort of like frame or sequence of frames where he just has like the ultimate Joker mad villain grin, and the way that the light illuminates only the bottom of his face and not the eyes, so like his eyes are still in the dark and Tinkerbell's just illuminating his mouth. It's like this really creepy look that I feel like, even if it wasn't 100% intentional, it absolutely conveys the original sort of, concept of who Peter Pan was outside of how he kind of ends up being in the movie.
Yeah, hold on. We since we've been talking about Hook, I think it is time to have a little chat about this guy. Can I bring it up? Here we go. We got our I don't know if you're getting my shmee there.
Oh, we've got we got a picture of Smee, and it's the cartoon version from the 53 movie.
Yeah, this is a Tokyo Disneyland shot from back when I would hit it quite regularly. But yeah, between the anime and watching Hook, I was just like, oh man, Bob Hoskins really nailed it. Shmi, I think they brought him back 20 years later to do it again in a different movie, if I'm correct. Just called Neverland. But
He has my favorite. Well, I would say like my top three favorite voices in this entire movie by far.
yeah, so
The the other one, it was maybe not, I didn't like the role as much, but the large Indian chief also is a sort of like an unknown legend in Disney voiceover. We'll get to that guy as well.
but I just since you were mentioning Hook maybe being the unintentional hero, I feel like that kind of makes Shmi his Jiminy Cricket to a certain point. Just for just for archetypes. I mean, having a shorthand when you're making these movies too. It's like some of the same people are working on them, so you're going to get some of the same vibe, and that's kind of the vibe I got from him. So
When Smee is an interesting character because he's like a non-conformist pirate, right? Like he's technically a pirate, but he's not like all the other pirates. He's kind of this aloof, and also like eager to please, like he's a middle management. He's like a corporate, bootlicking middle management pirate.
and I think by the time of Hook, they were playing him a bit too as like Hook's boy toy. So that's kind of that's something you could not have done in 1953 for sure. I guess
Well,
they're
and
saying
there was a lot of cool stuff from the movie, I think.
I just actually noticed this. I guess they're making a quote unquote live action version of this next year, which I do wonder if that's kind of where they're gonna, put their bid in a little bit for refashioning the story.
I mean, just keep adding to it. Again, this is one of the movies that has been readapted and revisited the most, I think. I didn't do any like spreadsheet analysis, but just the sheer amount of Tinkerbell stories and Neverland Revisited and again, this being a play, there's so many different adaptations of it just in like the play form. And one of a funny note that I noticed too is that once you know the background of the death of his brother on the ice and everything. There's a lot of Peter Pan on ice reproductions, which has this whole extra, dark tone to it, because technically that's how the brother died, was ice skating. And I wonder if anyone's ever actually died in a production of a Peter Pan on ice and also got a cranial fracture.
Oh yeah, that's some serious existential like ripples through time. For sure.
So, and we're on this note of Peter Pan being bad and maybe Captain Hook being good. So there's a couple extra elements in here to sprinkle in, I think, since we're kind of on that topic. One of them is that the Lost Boys, in the original writings, he wrote that Peter Pan kind of like thinned out the Lost Boys as they got older, and as they became more and more to manage. And he never really explicitly says what thinning out means. But again, one of these theories, if you just say like, well, if it's thinning out a herd the way that we understand it in modern day, he's literally killing them. So the reason why Lost Boys, if this is sidestepping that they're ghosts and they never grow up, if they're actually growing up, the reason that they never become old is because at night Peter Pan goes out and he just kills everyone that's starting to get a little bit too old. So when everyone wakes up in the next morning, it's like, oh, wasn't it like so and so's 15th birthday? He's not here anymore. So like everyone is just perpetually, like a tween or something, because he's killing them. And the ones that get away, or even maybe the ones that get rescued, essentially are being rescued by Hook so that he can bring them on board and teach them how to survive in this crazy world of Neverland. And by them, leaving sort of pubescence and entering adulthood, they become a pirate. So you really only have two options in this world. You're either a lost boy, or you live long enough and escape Peter Pan's grasp to then become a pirate and fight back against him.
Aren't the Lost Boys vampires? No. um, I, I I had a more notable allegory. I was thinking of the film Logan's Run, specifically the film version where they go to the, I forget what the district is called, but there's the burnt out area of the domed city where they have basically the tweens that are living a Lost Boys life. It's like kids aged from like 6 to 13 that just don't fit into their society. And one of them's like threatening Logan, and he starts bullying him like, oh, you look like you're like 14, 15. They're going to kick you out soon and you're going to have nowhere to go. You only get 15 years past that in the Logan's Run world anyway, 3 if you're in the book. So I don't know if you saw it, but I thought that was an interesting sci-fi sort of retake on the Lost Boy concept, and especially the thinning them out concept.
Yeah, I mean, this might be a little bit of a tangent. I believe there was also a movie with Justin Timberlake called Timeless or something along those lines, where essentially everyone is born and you get to live till like, I'm going to make up a number because I don't remember it, but it was like you get to live till you're 25 or something, and then you die. But you can earn extra years and essentially just be, young forever, for infinity. As long as you can keep stacking these years up. So some people have like 2 million years logged, and then like the amount of time you have left to live becomes the new form of currency. So if I wanted to like, buy something from you, I might offer you 5 years of my life to put onto your own in exchange for like a car or something.
Yeah,
But I always
that one's In Time. Actually,
in time. There you go.
I did a podcast on that a couple of years ago, and I think we ended up mostly talking about classic cars because that movie features so many. We were like, that's the best thing. Again, it's a high concept sci-fi. I'm always down for that. That's the guy that did Gattaca, so obviously he's thinking about what he's doing. But yeah, that movie has
It
some flaws.
absolutely had that Gattaca kind of feel to it.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, Gattaca gets the nod. Yet I haven't done a podcast about Gattaca, just In Time. But it's yeah, this is one of those movies where it's like I know it's not great, but I just like it more than I should. So um actually I am wondering how the general populace feels about Hook nowadays. Is it somewhat forgotten? I mean, it's Spielberg, so it's that weird blip on his radar, I guess.
I gotta say, I definitely don't have my thumb on the pulse of what everyone likes currently, but in my rewatch, I thought it held up absolutely well, like exceedingly well. And not just in just the I mean, it's got Robin Williams, it's got Steven Spielberg, like everything from the acting and the writing is phenomenal, but they pay so much homage to the original writing. Outside the 1953 cartoon, there's so many cool little Easter eggs. Like one of the examples that I'm gonna paraphrase and butcher a little bit, but I believe that Tinkerbell in the book always called someone like a silly ass, or like, equivalent of like a dumbass. I can't remember the exact phrase. It was like I think it was like something like silly ass. And in the Hook movie, towards the very very end, Tinkerbell, played by Julia Roberts, says that to Peter. She calls him like a silly ass or whatever that specific phrase was. And that's just one of like 20 or 30 little Easter eggs that I noticed in this rewatch of like, oh wow, what a cool sort of like harken back to the original source material that the 53 cartoon kind of glossed over.
Well, yeah, like the audience clapping Tinkerbell back to life is a pretty like definitive part of the play, but isn't in the movie at all. So, and I think
Yeah, that's another good point. A lot of the elements in the story were written specifically to have a big impact in the stagecraft. So like the crocodile with the ticking clock, even though it's like such a cool high level concept, even in the animation in the movie, in the actual play as it was being performed was an incredible point of the stagecraft, because they could actually have this like ticking and have it move around the audience, and added this whole extra level of like interactivity that you don't necessarily get the same feeling for in the movie. In the movie, it just adds itself as this like ticking reminder of, Hook might, is kind of like on the clock to being dead, or that time's passing, and that maybe the kids are getting older. It's the same exact trope of the 24-hour ticking time of like the building's about to explode, right?
and yeah, and also the Hook movie really kind of does dive into that concept where Hook, is trying to make himself the good guy for Peter's kids. I mean, for very ulterior motives, of course, but just the, if we
That's
are
such a
think
cool inversion of the original story too, because again, in the play, Hook was usually played by whoever was playing their dad, but in this case, it's two different people, and and he's like trying to like be the good guy. He's actively becoming the good guy in his like most evil form, quote unquote, as the Captain Hook.
I guess now's the time to be talking a little bit more about Hook because we need to get that as well. Because yeah, I did quite enjoy watching it. It was a lot better than I remembered it being. I think it had maybe too many blockbuster tropes when it came out and they just stuck out to you. But now 20, 30, 30 years down the line, 10, 20, 30 years down the line, those tropes don't bug us anymore. They're a little more charming. It's like, oh yeah, that's what movies were like back then, you know? I'm
Yeah,
thinking
that's a very
specifically
fair point.
like the Lost Boys village or hideout or whatever, where it's got all those tracks that they use, like those skateboard things. I'm like, oh my God, this could not have been made at any other time than when it was.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a ride straight out of Disney World, and it looks like someone could have lost their fingers easily in some of those set designs.
90s Disney World in particular, right? It's like rocket rod tracks or something. Oh,
Yeah,
that's land,
those
I
stood
guess,
out to
but
me too. That also may be an aspect of watching it now in like HD, whereas before you were probably watching it on a washed out CRT, or you saw it in the movie theater and it might have been a little bit blurrier. So, those extra little details might not have stood out as much as they do now, but again, it almost like adds a charming quality to some of those scenes that it didn't annoy me or take away from it at all. Because I guess part of this is like you're not really, at least me, I wasn't like absolutely teleported to Neverland and completely suspending all my disbelief, because the entire time you've got Robin Williams acting like he's still this like corporate guy from the real world. So that always kind of keeps you, from completely jumping completely into Neverland, I think.
and let's I guess another big thing with Hook is the makeup. Things that got me. I was like, why does Maggie Smith look exactly the same age in like 1991 or two? And I'm like, oh, they made her up to look older, and she actually does look like that now. That's amazing. So I was like really confused by that. I'm like, does she just not age ever? She's always been old. I don't know. And then I knew Dustin Hoffman was in this, but halfway through the movie, I just could not see him, and I had to check and make sure that was Dustin Hoffman. So I guess that's acting props that I literally cannot recognize this very iconic actor under this makeup and performance.
There's one other huge point that stood out to me, and that's that they did not try to turn it into an annoying musical. There's one musical number that I remember,
You get
um,
one.
and it wasn't even really like they broke into a song and dance. It was more of a montage where Peter's getting trained and he's learning how to like sword fight, and he's doing jumping jacks. And as he's doing this, they're all kind of singing this like chant slash song, but it doesn't have that same feeling of like, oh boy, we're like we just went into the song and dance routine in the Disney movie. It never kind of crosses that threshold, and it just remains kind of that 80s 90s musical, training montage, which I like. It's one of my favorite tropes. So
There was actually a plan to do that. Songs were written, and one you're forgetting about is Peter's daughter singing her little "I'm Lonely" song or whatever. And
yeah, I guess I'm not really counting that one just because it doesn't like transform into like everyone on stage is like singing. That's more of just like a, I don't know. I guess I give that one a pass.
No, I'm just saying that was the surviving song that actually made it into the movie, because there was something like five songs potentially written to make this a straight up musical, and that
I didn't know that. I'm actually very glad in retrospect that that did not happen.
well, I am too, because
But
that
that's
scene
that's a
kind of
personal
sticks
thing.
out. It's like, why is this here? Like they even could have, I don't know, like maybe the little girl was going to be like disappointed if she didn't get to sing her song. I don't know, but like the actress.
It was in the contract. It was in the writer.
Yeah, really. So but there was a point where they were thinking about doing that like seriously, and I guess in that case good heads prevailed. So
And we don't
better
need
head.
any more suicides associated with the cast of this of this production.
Oh yeah, no, not at all. So yeah, it is this is an interesting place to see Robin Williams. This is like right in the middle of his kind of like, I guess, transition period, because you're when audiences came to see this, they're still kind of thinking they still got manic cocaine Robin on the mind, but he's also taking a little more pains to act by this point. He's
Well,
already
is
done a
is
couple of
this
dramatic workers.
with I haven't done any of my research on this, but is this before or after the Aladdin cartoon,
This is
the
before the
movie book?
Aladdin cartoon, but with Disney, because it's Touchstone. He'd already done a Good Morning Vietnam and Dead Poet Society, so he'd already started to sort of like lay down a bit of his dramatic chops. And I think he actually basically missed the mid '80s due to cocaine. So,
Okay,
um,
so I mean, I guess one of my big milestones is him as the genie in Aladdin. I think that's like a huge milestone in his career where now he almost like fully embraced his previous stand-up over the top routines. And well, I guess even Good Morning Vietnam, he has that same like over the top aspect to him. But man, with the genie in Aladdin, it was like every single voice and impression that I think he had ever come up with, he just tried to put it all into that one movie, which reminds me a lot of his earlier stand-ups when he had like the rainbow suspenders on and he's like totally on cocaine, jumping around, bouncing from like one part of the stage to the other. I think there's a famous stand-up when he gets heckled and he actually stops and he like addresses the heckler directly. And I mean that was just that high frantic cocaine energy Robin Williams.
well, I guess the cool thing about this movie is he does get to do both, because Peter Panning is very much the button down dramatic Robin, and then Peter Pan, he gets to go full manic and childish on purpose, right?
Yeah,
It's
Jack, right? Remember
yeah,
Jack?
yeah. Oh yeah, a recent performance that kind of hits a similar vibe. Have you seen the Color Out of Space movie?
Oh, I absolutely love that one.
I
Yeah.
do, because you the first 30 minutes you're like, oh, it's nice to see Nick Cage here. Why did they cast Nick Cage? And then 30 minutes in, you're like, oh, that's why they cast Nick Cage.
Okay.
And now that's like one of my favorite Nick Cage performances. So, yeah, I know you. Yeah, you're all over Nick Cage, aren't you?
I mean, talk about like putting someone in a place where they can excel, right? Like it was almost made, like the movie wasn't necessarily written for him, but man, what a great like modern adaptation of Lovecraft plus an outstanding, feverish performance by Nicolas Cage. Like his acting becomes so wild that you actually believe you are also in a fever dream as you're watching it. It's amazing.
I guess that's why I'm saying that it sort of seems like a similar acting template and Hook. And it's perfectly fine in Hook, but maybe like, honed to perfection and Color Out of Space. We're
I
going
mean,
to let him.
Hook was reserved. Hook absolutely has that corporate, at this point, Disney is a full blown global conglomerate on their way to becoming Skynet, whereas they're like almost there now already, right? But it kind of comes across just like the tracks that you mentioned in the Lost Boys, like that those tracks happen in a global conglomerate, Steven Spielberg, multiple, $1 million budget actor blockbusters sort of environment. That doesn't happen in almost any other environment that I'm aware of.
But Hook is actually, who actually produced Hook? I want to say it was like Columbia or something. I don't think it was actually a Disney studio one. Let's see if we can work that out real quick. Hook is directed. There's the poster. Maybe we can glean it from the poster. Because yeah, now well, I don't know. We keep having various Pinocchio films come out of widely varying quality. So I guess when things are public domain, you can do whatever you want with them, can't you?
Yeah.
TriStar,
Oh, and that's
Amblin
actually,
TriStar.
I mean, it still has that high production budget value that you can see. Like the movie exudes it a little bit, that like corporate budget where they had more than enough money to put towards things and reshoots that. Like for example, the food fight scene, I read that they had done that so many different times, and it wasn't always going to be that multicolored version because it costs so much to do the reshoots and the retakes in color that they almost went with like making everything white or making everything gray. But essentially, it was demanded that everything stay in color, and that's probably one of the most memorable scenes of the movie. When someone tries to think about what they remember from that movie 20 years later, the food fight scene I think is at the top of those.
Yeah, you didn't want just gruel flying through the air at that point. Yeah, I'm also looking the budget for it, release date December 11th, 1991, probably explains why I couldn't remember if it's 91 or 92. Budget 70 million for 1991. That is pretty insane. That's like, just behind like Terminator 2 basically budget wise.
When they had all the ancillary, Happy Meals and Burger King meals and toys and everything. Like this was the full out assault on commerce when this movie came out.
Oh, and just I don't think we're going to talk about it in detail, but yeah, John Williams definitely made a very good score for this because you do not really miss the fact that they cannot use the iconic songs you might remember from the Disney version.
So speaking of iconic songs from the Disney version, the one that we can't go on without at least addressing was "What Made the Red Man Red." Right?
Yeah, it's about to be like, oh, you could fly, and I was like, oh no, he wants to talk about that one. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, this is the one. No one cares about the "You Can Fly" one. It's about who made the Red Man Red. And first, I want to answer that question that the song poses. The song itself explains that what made the Red Man Red was that the very first Indian prince kissed the maid and started to blush, and he's been blushing ever since. And that's what made the Red Man Red. But if you look at, why the original, if we're gonna step away from like the funny, silly cartoon aspect of it, what made the Red Man Red was actually that when the original colonizers showed up, the Indians that they found there were of what was it? Oh, it was the Bothuk Indians, and they essentially put red ochre paint all over themselves, all over their possessions, their canoes. When like a child was becoming a man, part of that initiation was taking this red clay kind of sand pigment and rubbing it all over themselves in order to become sort of an adult and pass through those rites of initiation. And in fact, one of the punishments in this culture was that they prevented you from wearing red on your skin. Like they wouldn't let you put red on your skin, as the form of punishment because that was like setting you as an outcast. So the actual, in case anyone cared, the actual reason why they were called Redskin and why this Disney is even asking what made the red man red, it was just that the very first tribe that people encountered at the very tip of, I think it was by Newfoundland, as those colonizers came in, those were the first ones they met, right? That was like the welcome to the new world, and they see these Indians putting red pigment all over their skin, and that's why they called them Redskins. It wasn't because they had like dark tans or they had like an amberish, bronze skin. It was literally because of red pigment on the skin. But that term just started to become applied to just all of them across the world, essentially, or at least across North America. So, anyways, there's the serious answer for what made the red man red. The song itself, interestingly enough, was done by a guy named Candido. I can't remember his first name. I had looked it up earlier. And I don't know if you're familiar with any of his other work, but he was the angry apple tree in The Wizard of Oz. He was the Indian chief in Peter Pan. He was one of Maleficent's goons in Sleeping Beauty. He was the captain of the guard of the crocodile in the Robin Hood movie. He also voices a number of characters in the Haunted Mansion attraction, the ones that have like the deep baritone voices. Those were originally voiced by the same guy. And he did a number of Ralph Bakshi movies. He did Hey Good Looking, and I think he did some voices in Heavy Traffic. So he had like this wide gamut, and and for whatever reason, the voice stood out. And I was like, I know I've heard that voice a million times before. It's a little bit unfortunate that he happens to be the Indian chief for this song that Disney would very much prefer to just forget ever existed, and I believe is cut out of most versions that get syndicated.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think this actually gets cut out. And how long have they been doing that? I feel like maybe the Blu-ray is like when I actually saw that sequence. Um, Again, I've got some, I saw the stage play. Maybe I even saw the on ice, although I don't think so. But yeah, it's this one even more than Alice in Wonderland. It's a little bit difficult to parse like what's Disney and what's just like baked into the story itself.
So I mean, again, since Peter Pan story was based on some of Melville's work, and Melville's very first book, I can't remember the name of it. I've got it written down somewhere, but his very first book was called Typee, and Typee was essentially about a white guy going and living among the cannibals, and this was what made Melville a household name. Like, it was a wildly popular book before Moby Dick even came out. So there was very much this connotation of Indians and cannibals and redskins that was incorporated by the original writer of Peter Pan, and that did make it, although Disney obviously, like, it wasn't necessarily as pronounced as like having a whole song and dance and a whole musical number. But the Disney movie again is very heavily criticized over this, and I would almost assume that anyone watching it in like modern times probably are watching a version that does not include this part.
Um, we were talking a little bit about Tokyo Disney. Are you familiar with the Tokyo version of the Tower of Terror?
We've talked about it, I think, offline before, but that it's the one in Orlando is Twilight Zone themed, and you have the same ride, and it's a similar experience. However, they've removed all of the Twilight Zone references.
And what they have added in, and I'm looking for the guys now. I'm going to miss that part, unfortunately, because I'm just seeing Twilight Zone here. But the whole conceit is you're at this hotel that's owned by a now dead rich industrialist. But the thing is, all the paintings that he would go to cultures all around the world and like pillage them. So there's all these like artifacts all around the hotel. There's these paintings, and the paintings always show like him and his assistant like running from like the natives trying to kill them because they're stealing their cultural artifacts and things. And
It just sounded like he worked for any British museum then.
yeah, really. And and the conceit is this tiki spirit ended up like murdering him at a New Year's Eve party, and now it's angry at you for being there, I guess, is the conceit of the ride. I can't quite remember, but
You're adding to the cultural appropriation of seeing these relics taken from their original holders essentially.
But all of the cast members working at the attraction just like idolize him as like a great industrialist. So that just adds to the like you have a tour guide talking about how great he is, and you're seeing these pictures of him like doing the worst things imaginable. So that's kind of like taking it in the other direction, I guess, than we did in the 1950s Peter Pan movie. Um, my main thought. You may have been here. You're close enough. Have you been to the ridiculous south of the border attraction in South Carolina before?
Oh,
Maybe driven
it
by it.
is
Yeah.
one of my absolute favorite play because when I was growing up, we used to do a road trip because I moved from upstate New York to South Florida around like the age of 8 or something. And then for the next, I don't know, 6 or 7 summers, every single year we would drive from South Florida back up to upstate New York. And that was almost like the exact middle point when I knew that, I didn't have to sleep in the car for another 2 days, whatever, is when you start seeing all these billboards for like Pedro and all these funny little like jokes and puns about chili and like Mexican food and stuff. But yeah, I am well versed in Pedro and south of the border, and I've been and I've bought fireworks and Mexican jumping beans from every stupid gift shop or in that whole entire area. So yes.
Although for listeners, don't eat there. There's probably a good Mexican restaurant within 10 miles, and that is not it.
But you should at least eat there once just for the
Once,
experience to
once.
say that you ate in the big sombrero restaurant. That's the one to go to.
That's true. That's true. But yeah, usually when I start thinking about Peter Pan and the unfortunate aspects, that's the first thing that comes to mind. So just that.
But also just in defense for horrible Mexican food too, not everyone that's doing a cross country road trip has ever even had actual authentic Mexican food. So even like a crappy watered down sort of like gift shop version of it is still better than just like hopping over to McDonald's maybe.
That is true. Now, for me, see, I didn't hit it till I was much older because my family trip was from Atlanta to Delaware, and we would use I-85 for most of the way, so we could see the Big
Mm-hmm.
Peach. Hey, we didn't know it at the time, but we were probably passing Heritage USA. We could have stopped in there for some Jesus time, because it was the '80s. But yeah, I remember you'd still see a few of the signs on I-85 for south of the border, and why don't we go there? And we couldn't because we were on the wrong highway. But
I mean, but you get there too, and you're just like, well, what is there to do? And it's like, well, you can eat some Mexican food, and you can buy some fireworks and a T-shirt. That's pretty much it. There's no rides, there's no attractions, there's no like, because it's not anything. It's just a glorified gift shop slash gas station with some like tchotchke sort of hotels around, but like it's not an actual thing that you do.
yeah, I guess I didn't hit it till I was like didn't actually go there till I was like maybe 22. So by then it was like so ironically amusing. It took a special place in my heart.
I
But
think it's almost as similar as someone going to like a Bucky's for the very first time and just being, amazed at like, oh wow, there's like over 100 gas pumps here, and the freaking inside of the gas station's like a super Walmart. But after you've gone through there, it's just like, oh no, it's actually just a really decent place as like a milestone slash pit stop on like a long road trip, and it continues to be that. And I hope south of the border continues to be that, long past when I'm gone.
yeah. I guess the modern equivalent, I didn't even know this existed until like a couple weeks ago listening to another podcast, but the Great Wolf Lodges just sounds like an insane it was described as being like everything a child would want and like aggressively horrible towards their adult um patrons. Just like
This
everything
is a
they just
real
keep.
thing.
Yeah, apparently it's these hotels for the family with a water park in the center, and you have like no amenities. So the parents like basically you have to like deal with your screaming kids the entire time you're there as they run around playing magic games and going down water slides and stuff. So
I think like Disney, I don't know if you heard this one, but Disney Cruise Lines actually done a great job of inverting that, where like like a lot of people have this connotation of like, oh, I'm not going to go on a Disney cruise line. I want to be surrounded by kids. Like, no, actually, they've perfected the science of putting the kids and like whisking them away and keeping them all out of sight so that like all the adults and parents can kind of get a break. It's probably not the same as going on like a Norwegian or one of those lines that like actively like has nothing at all for kids to do. But the Disney cruise lines are notoriously good for like occupying the kids to the point where you're just like, is my kid still alive? Like, are they even on the boat still? I haven't seen or heard from them in, like a day now.
Yeah, so the Great with Lodge is the polar opposite of that, basically. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's what it sounds like.
um, usually you got a late stage banger for these. You got a bit of research there to really set the world on fire.
I think I front loaded a little bit of it with just the backstory of J.M. Barrie and sort of his trajectory in life, the dead brother that he might have actually killed himself. Jury's out. The fact that he's got that Lewis Carroll connection. So I front loaded some of like the heavy hitter bangers. There was one aspect of this that's kind of like overt, and I just thought it was like an interesting topic because it doesn't get brought up as much as the racist version of the what made the red man red, but it's the sexist sort of angle that is discounted in so many of these parts of it. So like one of them is that in that previous song there's this extra aspect where like Wendy's not allowed to participate in any of it, and every time she tries to join the song and dance, they're like, no, you need to go and do chores, or you need to carry like these logs over here or something. Like she's actively excluded from any of this. In addition to that, there's really no girls at all in the Lost Boys. It's right in the name, Lost Boys. So Peter Pan himself, not only does he have these mommy issues, but he kind of actively dislikes women and does not want women around at all, in his whole entire clique. The only women that kind of even exist around Neverland are the mermaids, and the mermaids explicitly say that they're trying to drown Wendy once they see her. So there's this weird like sexual love triangle between Peter and Tinkerbell and Wendy, and I guess for a smaller degree the mermaids, just because that's kind of part of their own character. But it's weird that like when Wendy has this attraction to Peter Pan and Tinkerbell immediately gets jealous of it. In fact, the whole entire premise of the original movie, the 1953 cartoon, is that Hook literally says a jealous female can be tricked of anything, and he's talking about Tinkerbell being jealous over Wendy and Peter Pan. And that kind of drives like the main conflict of the entire movie, and the resolution is all about Tinkerbell having this kind of like jealousy over an attraction between the two. And I was all and in the book, Tinkerbell tells the Lost Boys to shoot at Wendy, like actually try to kill her. And in the cartoon, they kind of do that too, where she says like, "Oh, shoot her down," and they actually like are trying to shoot her with like slingshots and throwing like sticks at her and stuff. But in the original play, she actually gets shot by one of the Lost Boys. So which is, it's interesting because there's this like very strong recurring theme that, again, I think it's not just part of the story, it's about kind of the DNA that went into the original writer and just his entire experience growing up and kind of being stunted.
I'm working on a 30-year-old memory here, but do I remember in the play, like no one plays Tinkerbell. It's just a presence
It's a
on the
light.
stage. Yeah,
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 well,
yeah.
so they're actually okay. I'm glad you brought that up because there is a interesting twist here. I don't know if it's earth shattering, but it's the concept of lightness and darkness. And again, this plays into Peter Pan portraying himself as like the good guy, but really being the bad guy. And one of the strongest instances of this is sometimes in the play. It doesn't really come across as much in the cartoon movie, but in the original plays and a lot of the reenactments, like you said, Tinkerbell is actually portrayed as just like this big blinding light, and they'll usually just do like a spotlight or something, and that'll be Tinkerbell, or they've got some kind of like glowing effect. But in terms of how Peter looks at the world, he embraces darkness and kind of pushes away from light, which in just like typical metaphors and just the basic sort of like symbolism of light and darkness, that's the inverse of what you would normally expect. So for example, Peter finds his shadow, he gets so incredibly excited that he forgets that Tinkerbell's like locked in the drawer. And they have a little bit of a nod to this in the cartoon. It's a little bit more pronounced in the original writing. But he's so fascinated with his shadow and staying in the darkness. And as soon as anyone mentions turning on light, or bringing light to a situation, that's the thing that he's typically always against. And he's actually frightened of light and is more comfortable in the dark.
Meanwhile, all Captain Hook wants to do is play with his toys, like Dark Helmet and Spaceballs, yeah. Especially in the Hook version where he has that like wonderful like what's it under his bed or something.
Honestly, I came away from this loving Captain Hook, um, not just in the cartoon, but in the Hook movie. I think he kind of is like the cooler character, and especially if you consider it with the theory of Peter Pan's killing the Lost Boys and Hook is the good guy, either saving them or fighting back against Peter. Just the character of Hook just has extra levels of depth that I really like. And I guess Peter Pan too, because having this like really dark shadowed history and him almost being this like horrible trickster. Like in the play, there's another aspect that doesn't come across in any of the movies, and that's that Peter mentions that he gets so caught up in the moment sometimes when the Lost Boys are fighting against the pirates, that sometimes just for fun he switches over to the pirate side and fights against the Lost Boys just for fun, because he's just like so built up in the moment. So again, I think this goes into his trickster Pan sort of not being the good guy, if anything might be the bad guy aspect, which all
What,
these are so much cooler. I wish some of this was captured in that original cartoon.
what was Peter Panning? He was a not was he a banker? That's what bankers do, right? Play both sides. I put it. Oh, I just put a corporate raider. I guess he's the lawyer. Excuse me, but not that that's a whole lot better. But
Well, and they use in the Hook movie, they use that raider because it's like, oh, Peter, you're a pirate now, you know?
yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. But yeah, I was just thinking of playing the both sides. With a good banker always funds both sides, right? So you get at least half your money back with interest. Having Robin Williams in this also, it doesn't help the shantytown pirate village set because you can't help but really think of the Popeye village. I'm pretty sure they did not use Malta for this, but definitely had some flashbacks to the Altman Popeye movie. I don't know if you've seen that or not, but
It's not great. It's not great. I remember seeing that when it came out, and yeah.
it's fascinating. I'll put it that way, at least. But
Okay,
this,
in like in a Tommy Wiseau room kind of way, maybe.
speaking of weird musical, that one definitely ranks in there. And making Robin Williams singing a Popeye voice. They got Shelley Duvall singing, which not her strength. A weirdly charming movie though.
Well, and random tangent here too, just because again, Candido, I'm just fascinated with this guy's voice. He also sang some of the Popeye songs, like the Popeye the Sailor Man, that went into like children's records. So that's another place where some people might recognize his voice from. If you've never heard of him before, let me just find out what his actual name was. He's got a rendition of One Meatball, which is the best thing that you could ever listen to, I think. Of his. Candy Candido. That was his name. Candy Candido.
Seems to ring some kind of a bell. Um, but yeah, maybe that's I'll have to go search around for that later. um, I don't know. I guess what we all have our little Peter Pan things and have to hold on to some weird part of our younger selves. What are you holding on to?
I mean, honestly, I'm about to turn 40 in less than 6 months, and I still love, playing video games and watching Disney cartoons, and so I think in that way, I refuse to grow up for sure. Although I kind of felt like I was more of a Jeffrey's Toys R Us kid in terms of not growing up, more so than Peter Pan. Peter Pan always had a creepy aspect, and also I think I just always got soured because whenever Peter Pan was on TV, I'd get excited, but it would end up being like one of those boring play versions and not the actual cartoon. So I was just like constantly disappointed whenever the phrase Peter Pan came up. But the concept of just like always staying young and just being one of those lost boys, I think that just resonates with everybody.
I guess that's a partly a function of Disney's old marketing strategy for their classic films. For like every 7 years we'll put it back in the theater, and in the between times you can just screw off. You can't watch these films. Which I've been reading the Disney War, so that was a big thing. They're like, this is our strategy. We can't change it. That's how we keep making money from these films. I guess now the way they make money from the films is to make the live action ones that are so terrible you have to go running back to the originals. When we did Pinocchio just a few scant months ago, I didn't actually know that there was a again quote unquote live action one coming out, which sounds like a hot mess despite having Robert Zemeckis directing it. But I guess that he's got a weird career because of course, he did his classic films. He did all those weird early CGIs. Then he made a few straight dramas, and now he's making Pinocchio. So yeah, that's pretty weird.
I think you might actually be onto something here where they release a live action remake. People see it and they're like, I could have sworn the original was better. Let me go back and watch the original. And now Disney just got two watches out of you instead of one.
Well, I heard someone again on a different podcast mention this, and I was like, that actually sounds like not like just a joke, but what they're doing. The idea being that these movies are kind of like grandma telling you to get a savings deposit or bond or something. These are like Disney's like future bonds, right? They're just like it's like they're spending the money to make this kind of crap movie, but one, it makes you like the original better and extends the life of that one. So you, in the long run, you will continue to make more money from that original version, but you need this kind of, it's almost like a trailer for the old version, like a two and
Yeah,
a half
just
hour
wait
trailer.
for the official Disney classic NFTs to start coming out.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of hope we start forgetting about NFTs soon, but
Yeah, good luck. I don't think so, man.
yeah. I guess I'm one of those guys that just refuses to wrap my head around either. So I actually own a little bit of crypto, but that's another thing I don't want to think about like at all. But just because I think it's just on PayPal. You want to put something in crypto? Sure, why not? See what happens. I haven't looked for 6 months, so don't know what happened there.
Yeah, keep not looking. You're doing
Yeah.
fine.
Okay. That I can keep that up for sure. um I guess we'll wind this one down unless you got any other big points you want to make, which
So
you are
yeah, I
welcome to
mean,
do.
so I hinted towards this earlier on, and again, this one just kind of caught me by surprise. But um, and not to leave this on a somber note, but this truly did kind of leave the lasting impact from all the research into this, and that's that Peter Pan, he becomes an icon, right? But it's all of the characters of Peter Pan, the original and the movie more so, are based on these Llewyn Davies children, and they all end up having short and tragic lives. At least the ones that don't end up killing themselves have short and tragic lives. One of them died in the early 20s as a soldier in World War One. Another one died right before his 21st birthday, drowning, and this was Michael, which was one of the kids that was, the two brothers were named after. John, the other kid, died of lung disease, and then the namesake Peter threw himself under a train at age 63. And the quote was, that terrible masterpiece. That's how he always referred to his inclusion in Peter Pan. So the I think I maybe I just like always have this propensity to like go towards like the weird, dark, sort of like black humor angle of things, but it just kind of completely took me off guard, but made me feel even more interested in this whole backstory of Peter Pan, because it's not just this infantile like, well, I don't want to grow up and I just want to have fun forever. Like there was some really truly deep-seated emotional, psychological, stunted reasons why this story came together and why the characters were named after certain people and why his shadow was disconnected. Like all of these things build up to an incredibly complex person and a really, battered life that guy and everyone that he kind of interacted with was affected by this Peter Pan story in very, long lasting ways. And then sometimes that's just interesting to me. Like there's not that much backstory in Dumbo, I don't think, like it didn't affect so many people's lives in these different ways to the same aspect of Peter Pan. And I guess before, the Alice in Wonderland was another good example of that.
So much Victorian era excess. By the 1960s, they got it way streamlined. You film the Misfits next to atomic bomb tests and let half the cast and crew eventually die of various cancers just for another tragic production. But yeah, that was always a weird one. You heard much about that?
I mean, funny enough, I'm doing some completely unrelated research that led directly into those original Bikini Atoll atomic tests. And one of the original guys there, have you ever heard? This is a total wild tangent, but the guy that did the flatworm experience, or experiments where they would teach a flatworm to avoid light, until it was a conditioned response, and then would like cut them in half and they'd regrow each section, and both of those sections knew. And then he chopped one up and fed it to other worms, and the worms that ate the worm that learned about avoiding light, now the ones that consumed him also knew about avoiding light, almost through this transference. And it was the origination of the term engram, an engram being like a physical manifestation of a memory, like the physical connection between two neurons essentially was the memory itself. And it's kind of like antiquated knowledge, but the guy that came up with part of that theory was directly related to that flatworm research, and he came right out of the military into the Bikini Atoll test, saw these huge atomic bombs going off, went into comedy writing for TV in Cincinnati, and then left that and became this sort of researcher into engram research. And engrams is directly related to Stephen or Richard Dawkins' concept of the meme, of like
Oh,
passing
right.
around images. Like that's an exact correlation between all of this. So I was on like this wild tangent, but yeah, the atomic tests happened in this exact early 1950s like to early 1960s era. Like I think it was like 54 was one of the first drops, and then 58 was towards like the end of it. But like it was this like rapidly changing world where you've got like technicolors out, atomic bombs are out, World War II just happened, like just so many things are happening all at once. I don't know if the world could have handled an internet at that same time, right? Imagine like just being overloaded with information and all of these crazy world changing things happening, at the exact same time.
All of our trivia just keeps overlapping. I was doing a podcast 2 weeks ago. I do one where we talk about Twilight Zone episodes, and we were noting how the concepts, they didn't have words yet. They didn't have the vocabulary to talk about AI, so they're like saying memory tracks, and we were like, "Well, what would you say now? Engrams?" And we're like, "Where was that from?" We decided Star Trek: The Next Generation, but you've given us a far
No,
earlier
and
answer.
so engrams was from coined around 1904. The guy's name was Richard Seaman, haha, Dick Seaman. Um, but he's the one that coined engrams. He coined the original concept of a meme, but it was MNEME, named after the Greek goddess of memory. But that exact word and definition is what evolved into our current version of meme. But also engrams, if you're familiar with Scientology and Dianetic aspects, engram is essentially if you have like a bad or negative emotion, that's actually like an entity, like an alien entity that came from another universe that is inside your body. And part of going clear and doing all of like the check-ins with the e-meters is kind of like helping you expel those engrams from your body. And once you've expelled all the engrams, you're now, quote unquote clear. And that's what going clear is. And again, that's the exact same concept of engrams, which came from Dick Seaman, 1904.
Well, they only tell you at the highest levels of Scientology is the way to get rid of your shadow self is just to close the window real fast.
Yeah.
Just to wing it on, take that bus back to its original port. But I mean, that is kind of the idea. You can take it, through it from a sci-fi author. You can have it from a Victorian madman, but people get similar thoughts here and there. That's why Hollywood always makes, the two same movies at the same time, right?
Well, and again, you brought up when we first started talking about this, that strong archetype correlation of Ahab and Captain Hook, where it's like the same story just told from different perspectives, but the archetype is so strong that you can paint it up in any different way. It's like a one of those overused analogies of like the eight blind men feeling the elephant in the dark room, right? Like one guy's got the trunk and one guy's got the tail, and like they're all describing an elephant, but they all just have their own kind of perspectives on it.
And they say there's only what 12 basic stories, so you got 12 elephants to go explore, I guess. Story templates or whatever. I guess we will go ahead and end this one for today. So, what's going on in your world? This one's going to be pretty quick to publish, and people will be hearing us a few days after recording.
Oh, so one big one is the Chosen One issue 1 is finally out. It's available in some select comic shops and small places across United States, but you can also check the one-on-one podcast.com website. Juan is the creator and namesake of the Chosen One. But check that out. Brand new comic that's going to be an ongoing series. The following issues are going to have a whole bunch of popular conspiracy podcasters in it and stuff. So that's a really fun one. And then I will continue working on a game that I started earlier this year called Lucifer Lives in Lower Manhattan. It's not available yet, but the Steam page might be available. So if you want to go in, like, click the watch this game, do that for Lucifer Lives in Lower Manhattan on Steam.
Yeah, that's why earlier when I brought up Nick Cage, I was like, wait a minute, what am I saying? I don't need to tell you anything about Nick Cage. You talk to Juan all the time.
So and yeah, you can check for updates on my stuff at paranoidamerican.com and at paranoidamerican on Instagram. And I also wanted to end my little monologue here with my two favorite lines from the Hook movie, and this is in the insult fight between Rufio and Peter. And I'll go with Rufio and then Peter's response. So Rufio is, "You're a big fart factory, slug slime, slack of rat guts and cat vomit, cheesy scab, pickled, pimple squeezing finger bandage, week old maggot burger with everything on it and flies on the side." And Peter comes back with, "Well, you're a lewd, crude bag of pre-chewed food, dude, you zebra-headed, slime-coated, pimple farming Parmesium brain, munching on your own mucus, suffering from Peter Pan envy."
I'm just gonna cut it there. There's no other way to end that podcast. I was even gonna be like, "Oh, it's like beat poetry skills." I was like, "No, no, no. You say that, and then it just ends. That's that. There's no other way, really."
Yeah,
There we go.
that was such a fun rewatch, man. Like I mean, not the cartoon as much. I mean, the cartoon was, it was good. It was a good cartoon, but the freaking Hook movie was like, man, I'm invested in this movie. I actually
Oh yeah, for
stopped
sure.
whatever I was doing and started paying attention to it. You know.
No, I watched Hook first and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I like Peter Pan too, but actually I started watching my Blu-ray and then it got stuck on a scene. So I went to YouTube and watched it there. And I think I fell asleep in like the last 5 minutes and then woke up and apparently like three Curious George movies had played while I was sleeping in my computer chair. So I was who knows what subconscious things I got from that.
There's some crazy backstory for Curious George. I don't remember it, but the Man in the Yellow Hat was based on like a really dark real life story, I think.
On the plus side, I started with Peter Pan, and it no longer took me into Elsa Gate territory. So I guess they fixed that.
Okay, yeah.
We just did a
They
video.
might finally be cracking down on some of that crazy shit.
We just did a video at work for the Halloween song. So it has us on like costume. I actually was wearing like a Spider-Man, which is what I'm thinking about Elsa Gate, but doing the Halloween song and we cut it, so the kids can like learn the song and learn the moves. And we're all singing it like this really looks like an Elsa Gate video. This it has that weird feel. So um the next movie on the line is I think Lady and the Tramp, which isn't the most exciting one for me. After that, Sleeping Beauty, which is a real deep dive.
Or was that sarcasm in Lady and the Tramp, or are you legitimately excited about that one?
No, no, I said I'm excited about Sleeping Beauty.
Oh, okay, okay.
I'm almost wondering what if there's anything. Do you think there's any meat in Lady and the Tramp? I don't think I've seen it before, to be perfectly honest.
in terms of like symbolism and stuff, it would be a stretch, I think, because I don't know. It's a good question because it's not really that same typical fairy tale aspect that every other movie's on. The only thing that comes to mind is again the racist "We Are Siamese, If You Please" song.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's worth doing a whole podcast around one racist song about Siam.
Oh my God, there's already a live action remake of that from 3 years ago. That's insane. Okay. I didn't even know that existed. Based on Happy Dan the Single Dog. I feel like this one could probably make like maybe we should just make a 30-minute episode or so out of that one then and then give some.
And I might even suggest not because it's a good idea, but just because dogs and cats. But this could be combined with Milo and Otis. Was Milo and Otis a? Oh no, sorry, Fox and the Hound. Fox and the Hound was a Disney movie too, right?
Yeah, I almost accidentally said Fox and the Hound when I said Lady and the Tramp. So
We might be able to just combine though, because Fox and the Hound does have some kind of cool background and I wouldn't say as like esoteric metaphor angle, but I think some of the original characters and there's like some allegory stuff going on that might be like if you combine those two, there would be enough for a podcast episode, but probably not just for Lady and the Tramp
that's
or
what I
Fox and
was
the Hound by
thinking.
itself.
Okay, let's do it that way then. And next time we do this, we will combine those.
When
Actually,
was
I
Fox and the Hound?
Fox
That
like
was like 80s, right?
1980. Yeah, it was 80. That was one of the
81.
last ones before Eisner came on, I think. I think when Eisner came on, they were working on the Black Cauldron, which that'll be fun when we get there. But yeah, I'm almost like, oh, I got Lady and then Sleeping Beauty, which is like just like that one definitely got something. So
Yeah, Sleeping Beauty would be a really good one.
that might be the deepest one so far. It's been a little while since I watched it, but um, I think yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. There we go. So there's definitely some coming soon, and then I think after that's like Dalmatians, which can easily be combined with live action ones, a la Peter Pan or Alice. So
I mean, yeah, you can throw in the Cruella live action on that one. Have
exactly.
you
Oh,
have you seen Cruella?
no, I think I've only seen 101 Dalmatians when I was a
Oh no,
kid.
dude, absolutely watch the
Oh,
Cruella movie.
when we get to that, I'll make sure to do that, and I should prioritize that over like the '90s one. So I'll do that.
It's good. It's 100% worth a watch.
Yeah. So no, I'm starting to get the idea. Like obviously Pinocchio, I'm like glad I didn't know there was a newer live action one to watch. So which came
And
out.
it's got Tom Hanks in it, I believe. I haven't seen that one yet.
It does. Oh, it's supposed to be just a hot mess,
I
basically.
I believe Tom Hanks is Geppetto in
Yes, that's
the
correct. That's
new
correct.
remake. Yeah.
I listened to a podcast though because I'm not going to watch the movie, and they were kind of talking about how it seems like he couldn't have been on set for more than like 2 days, that sort of thing. Like he's got a lot to do for like just as Geppetto, I guess, kind of like the
Well, yeah,
original.
you dress him up as an old man in front of a green screen. You have him say like 200 lines, and then he goes along his normal business, right?
Yeah, that
Everything
sounds
else is
about
like
right.
an ADR. He just has. They probably have a bunch of scenes with like his back turned, and he's like moving his arms like he's talking, and then they just have him phone it in from freaking Greece or wherever he's at.
Oh yeah, he did move. That's weird.
Pinocchio also has a lot of really good B horror movie knockoffs, more so than I think any other Disney related folklore
Yeah, I
movies.
just ran across this totally bizarre looking DS game that was like Pinocchio's puzzle. It just looks super creepy. There's the one where uh Benini or whatever his name, he won over everyone with Life is Beautiful and then took a crap on their head by playing Pinocchio.
So Pinocchio's Revenge 1996, well worth the watch of I what I'm gonna assume is like a 2-star movie, but it is worth the watch. It's
we we
at least one
almost
time.
I just did a Alien podcast and we almost followed it up with Alien 2 on Earth, a 1981 Italian film that pretends to be a sequel to Alien. So, but schedules went whack. We're going to be doing Coppola's Dracula instead, which is just probably not a bad call. So, okay, I do need to step out the door in a moment then. So, anyway, yeah, we'll get something rolling before too long. Yeah, next week's actually my week off, so yeah, tell me your schedule. I might be able to, flex somewhere easily. So,
Okay, I mean, yeah, honestly, similar times, anytime Tuesday through Thursday, same time would work out pretty fine for me.
okay, I might peg a day for you next week to do all those animal movies and then just knock those out of the way.
Yeah, I'm all for that, man.
Okay, I will